The animation blueprint window is the primary window when working with animations that allows us to set the rules and the systems to control those animations based on events and inputs and values that happen at runtime. Let's go ahead and take a look at one. Inside of our content folder, we go down to animations under mannequin, and we can find third person anim BP. It's an animation blueprint. We'll open it up and we'll go ahead and take a look at it. Now, it should look like a standard editor window. We've got a viewport. If you worked with blueprints before, we have a graph. We have some variables. We have some details. We have a few things unique to it. So let's go ahead and take a quick look at the animation blueprint window before we start working on it in the next part of the course. So at our top toolbar, we have things like compiling and saving, since this is a blueprint. We can change our preview mesh if we have multiple ones. We can quickly create assets since we're in our animation windows. We can make a static mesh out of this preview pose. Since we're working in blueprints, we have things such as finding and hiding nodes, different class settings and class defaults, plane, so we can test our project, our debug filter, and then our quick shortcuts. On the left, we have our My Blueprint. If you've worked in Blueprint before, this is where we have our events on our functions and our variables. In the middle, we have our event graph for whichever event graph we're working in. We have different types, which I'll cover here shortly. We have our details panel. So these are details that are specific to this animation blueprint. And some of them are like our default values, which we'll see adjusted in a bit. We have our preview scene settings if we want to change our viewport to make it look a little bit different, more like what we're testing. At the bottom, we have the ability to preview our animation live. On the left here, we can see our preview, and it's in the idle state. But if I was to change my speed and adjust it up, you're going to see our animation slowly changing based on that speed value. So we can test and preview our animation blueprint in the editor without actually having to run it based on values we set. So for example, I could reset this, check is in error, and you'll notice it's playing the loop for the jumping or falling. If you're using root motion, you can adjust them here. And if you're using specific notify settings, they can be adjusted here. And of course, our asset browser, which is hiding right here, is we were to access assets if we wanted to bring them in, such as we want to set up one of our graphs to play back something. Now, there are two things to note inside of here. You actually have more than one different graph you're working with. If we close our graphs at the top, we'll see our event graph. And on our left under graphs, we have event graph. This is our event graph. This will basically fire every time our animation is updated, and stuff will happen based on what we want to have happen. In this case, we're saying, hey, how fast are you going? And are you jumping? And then we're storing that information for use later. Also inside of our event graph is where we handle things such as our animation notifies. When our animation sequences play back, the events happen inside of here. Now, our event graph is good for getting that information in and out. But then what do we do with that information? Well, we have our anim graph, which we can see here on the left. I'll double click on it and you can find it here. This is our output pose. This is what determines what's going to happen at that current moment when this graph is ran. And that's what's determining we're doing our idle animation here. Now you can play individual animations directly into our output pose. So for example, I could say, here's our walk animation. I could drag it in and say play third person walk, connect it to my output pose. I'll go ahead and compile, and you'll notice now it's walking. And if we were to actually run this example, he's always going to be walking because we're not doing anything with that data. We're just simply saying, hey, play that animation. But a more advanced use is our state machines. And if we open up our state machine, this is where we get our states. Are we idling? Are we running? Should we be jumping? Should we be looping that jump? Should we be landing the jump? What is going on currently based on the information that we get from our event graph? And that's what our state machine allows us to set up. We're going to take all the information we've looked at so far, all of our different assets, all of our different blueprints, and we're going to duplicate this existing third-person character, modify one of the animations, and put it all together so you can see how it works.